right, so I'm Sarah, and this is my review of Moving Beyond White Guilt by Amy Edgington. So I doesn't look like I have any publication information, but Amy Edgington is the author of it. And the title is Moving Beyond White Guilt. So we pull up my guidelines. So to start out, the author's topic was just how we can move beyond white guilt. She doesn't explain what it is, um, but she explains the aspects of it and what we can do to move beyond it. And the main thesis is that it seems like in her eyes, white people are inherently racist, and there are things that we can do to move beyond it. And she describes the different ways that we can move beyond it. It does succeed through I have some very strong feelings about this article. It does succeed through reference giving full explanations. So it references history and what parts of history are responsible for this white guilt. She makes interesting points about part of moving beyond is understanding white ancestors that did oppose slavery, even though they're not mentioned in history class. But there are a lot of failings in this article, I feel. The tone is very judgmental, and I don't appreciate that. It feels a bit like, as a white person reading this, it feels a bit like being condescended to and sort of talked down to, like you're a child again. And she is this wise older person that's telling you how things are. I mean, she makes some good points. Like, the more I learn about racism, the less work people of color have to do to explain to me how they experience the world. I mean, that's a great point. I mean, that's logical. If you learn about the way a person lives, you're not going to have to ask questions about it. I mean, that's common sense. And there's a lot of moments like that. But there's also points like where she talks about measuring your commitment to fighting racism not by how many people of color we count as friends or lovers, which makes sense. I mean, that's not an accurate measurement, but by how many white people we are willing to speak to racism about. That seems performative. If you're measuring how committed you are to being anti-racist solely by the white people you are talking to about being anti-racist, that is literally just describing performative action. I mean, yes, you are doing something. You are, what is the word that she used? Converting. She used converting, which I was also kind of uncomfortable with because of the religious context. You are working on that conversion politics, but I don't know, it doesn't sit right with me, and I'm not even completely sure what it is. But so getting on into summarizing the article, the author's main objective is to explain white guilt, how it has affected her, what she has done to move beyond it, and it's sort of an advice piece for how to move forward as a collective people and as an individual. So that's her main objective. The author's main argument starts in the first section with the ways in which we can diffuse the negative aspects of guilt. So the main argument is that action is what's going to ultimately help not necessarily end racism, because I think her point is that it's never going to totally end. how it can make you and others anti-racist. So it's talking about, learning and being active, listening and talking about it is all things that you can do to be anti-racist. Learning about the history, recognizing those heroes and sheroes in anti-racist history that are both black and white. And just all together, that action is what is going to help move us forward. So that is her main argument. The article sets out to prove that action is the way to do this by talking about the different actions you can take, like learning, being involved in the community, listening to when people of color have something to say, talking about racism, learning about history, really bringing out shining examples of people of color and anti-racist people. So my reflections and critiques. The main ideas are logically structured, they're easy to follow. So it starts to talk about, in the first section, what those negative aspects of guilt are, how we can combat them. It moves on to the history of racism, what we can do about it, and how to work in the modern day to recognize flaws from that history, and then looking forward. So you have a now, then, and future format. It's effective. It's very easy to read. So for ambiguities or confusion in the author's content, I just wish things were worded a bit differently. I don't think there's any ill intent whatsoever in the writing of this piece, but it's uncomfortable in a way that I don't think is productive to read at some points. So under the first section and the subsection talk, she says, we must also seek converts to try to turn the souls of other white people from racism's cynical fear, blah, 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 goes on. I don't, like I said before, I don't think convert was the word that she's looking for, because that has a very religious context. It has a negative context with the LGBT community because you have like conversion therapy, which is not pleasant. So I think a little tweak in vocabulary would have been very effective there. She also, in that same section, has a quote, there are clearly many white people who are deeply committed to white supremacy. As a reader, to me, it feels a little bit like she's, in that line, she's saying, well, there's many people that are white supremacists. Maybe you could be one of them. And I don't think that's the most effective way to approach that. I could just be reading it wrong, but I don't care for that. In Back to the Past, she, in that last paragraph, she has a line, white people often protest in anger or frustration that there is nothing we can do to change history, but in fact, history is a collective memory, ... But there is nothing we can do to change history. What happened, happened. It was terrible. But I think it's important that we don't try to alter or misremember things, because I don't think it does those people that lived back then justice. It doesn't accurately report the past. And it's just not fair to those people that lived back then, because those were people the same as you and I. They had lives, they did terrible things, they did wonderful things. In phrasing it that history is a collective memory just concerns me, because to me it sounds like she's advocating for just leaving parts of history out or just tweaking the story a little bit. And again, I don't necessarily know that that's what she's saying, but that's the way it's coming across to the reader. And I just don't like that. I really, really don't like that. Maybe it's a racist thing for me to think, but I think all of history should be very accurately reported. Doesn't matter who did what, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's just how I feel. And I feel very strongly about that. So there are some major pitfalls in this argument, in this, not the argument, but the article, that I have very strong feelings about. So I agree with the author and some of the points that she has, especially on the first page. And I think they're very simple things that you can do, and they're worded very well because it's much like things that we tell kids to do in school. So she says something in the do something section. Racism is so huge that all my acts seem small in comparison, but it is precisely this kind of lifelong chipping away that we must commit ourselves to doing. I mean, that's just like what we tell kids, like with recycling. You recycling one plastic bottle might not seem like such a big deal, but imagine if everybody in the world did that. It would make a huge difference. So you might be a small individual, but you are part of something bigger. So there are things like that, and like I quoted earlier, the more I learn about the more I learn about racism, the less work people of color have to do to explain to me how they experience the world. Again, makes total sense, and I agree. Um, the strongest antidote to guilt is action. Absolutely. If you have a problem with something, if something makes you not feel good, do something about it. I mean, that's perfect common sense. Is exactly like the basis of a lot of things that we teach kids how to problem solve. And that's wonderful. It's just some of for the things that I disagree with, some of the kind of judgmental little bits that I just am either uncomfortable with, or like the whole history is a collective memory, dot, dot, dot. I'm just not comfortable with at all, because to me, it sounds like an insinuation that history can be tweaked to make us more comfortable with it. And I just don't like that. Totally disagree. Moving on though. Um, the quality and quantity of the evidence presented in the article, I do not care for. There is little um evidence that's given. So in the Finding Our Hero section, she says, how many Americans know that the hymn Amazing Grace was written by a slave trader describing a religious conversion that led him to spend the rest of his life working to abolish the slave trade in Great Britain? That's lovely. But show me the proof. I mean, I don't doubt it, but give me who was this person? What happened? Like, that's not solid enough evidence for me, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of this, the vague telling of stories. Give me evidence, give me names, give me numbers, so on and so forth. So assess the credibility and reliability of the sources and data used. Again, that kind of goes in line. There just isn't sources referenced. So again, there's just, for assess whether the evidence effectively supports the article's arguments, there just isn't a whole lot of evidence given. The anecdotes do support the author's arguments, but again, we don't have like facts that go along with these anecdotes. Oh, I'm so sorry. My rabbit just had like a moment. Okay. So impact of the article. For overall education, I do think it is a very unique standpoint that teachers overall would benefit from reading about. But I think most all points of view are worth hearing from, because this is somebody that's clearly very much dedicated towards anti-racism. For me, I wouldn't say it necessarily addressed any. Emma, go on. I wouldn't say it necessarily addressed any gaps. It did show me a different point of view that you don't hear about quite so much, but I wouldn't say that it filled in a gap because of some of the judgmentalness to it. So discuss how the article fits or doesn't fit within your classroom teaching. This is one article I don't think I'd be bringing a whole lot into my classroom because I'm elementary ed, and especially the little guys, I don't think need to be introduced to the idea of white guilt. They'll probably access it, have it at some point in their lives, but I don't know that bringing racism by name into the classroom is a good thing. With the younger grades, by the time you're getting to 4th, 5th, 6th, you're getting there. You can bring it in. With the little guys, I don't see this fitting in. to my pedagogy personally. This was a good paper to read. It was a very unique point of view, very strong point of view that was worth reading. The article just really could have been better written from a, I don't know, again, a less judgmental standpoint. I would have appreciated, because I just felt condescended to, and that makes me just dislike it as a whole. That could just be my point, or it could be exactly what she's talking about with like white guilt, white fragility. I might be very guilty of that myself. And that's not, I guess that's not really for me to decide. But it's an important article to read because it's a unique point of view. I just don't think it was the strongest example of what being anti-racist can look like. So, yep,